Thank you again for joining us. Really excited to kick off our next fireside chat here with Rob Oliver from Baird, interviewing Andy Tang, partner at Draper Associates. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Claudia. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. My name is Rob Oliver. I'm a managing director at Baird, which is a research-driven investment bank. So I follow public companies, and it's my pleasure to have Andy Tang here. By the time a company gets to me, it's got 50 to 100 million in recurring revenue, market fit's established, and they're thinking about an IPO. And even then, it's very hard to pick the winners. Really difficult. So that's why I have so much admiration for what Andy does and has done so well throughout over 2 decades of his career, being one of the best at picking early stage companies. Andy's a partner at Draper Associates and a managing partner at Draper Dragon. He has a background in engineering and holds a BA from UT Austin, which we have in common, graduate school, hook 'em horns. It's weird for a New England guy to do hook 'em horns, but we'll do it. And an MBA from Wharton, and also has some industry experience. So Andy, welcome. And I wanted to start by just asking, what got you to the VC world to start? And then once we level set your background, we can kind of dive in on some of the big picture issues, both on the tech and VC side.
Rob, you and I don't know each other that well. We just met, but I kind of, based on our hair profile, we're kind of from the same era.
Yes.
In our days, there's no career planning, right? Was there career planning? I think I look at the young people here, you guys really are a lot more accomplished, a lot more intelligent, and a lot more prepared than we were. The VC industry, I'm sure with your public investing career, a lot of it is the element of chance, right? An engineer moved to Silicon Valley and one thing led to another, got into a VC fund because I enjoy working with startups. So, and I actually would advise, there's some students here, just do what you like and things happen. Sometimes when you try to plan things, you kind of took the fun out of it, and I remember one of my professors told me early on, just try to be as general as possible, be a generalist, and let things happen. And at Draper Associates, we're all generalists. We look at everything and anything. And you asked me about kind of how we look at the world. And how is it that we find these new things? The secret is this, right? The secret is it's crowdsourced. In other words, we come to conferences like these, we listen to what you guys are working on, because we're at essentially at the top of the funnel, you're at the bottom of the funnel, or the top of the pyramid, right? We have to put our ears to the ground and listen to what entrepreneurs are working on. And really it's hard work, but it's a labor of love. We love coming to these conferences and just talk to people and figure out what new people and young people are working on.
It feels like we're increasingly in an age of specialization. So that message, what I'm hearing you say, is to encourage people to be generalists and approach things in different ways. In the earlier panel, we heard that sometimes the best coders or developers are the artists. Does that message resonate with those with whom you speak?
Yeah, I would say even more so now. And I'll just ask you this question. If you try to specialize before Industrial Revolution, right, you might inadvertently specialize in the wrong thing because there is a platform change coming, right? And you could replace Industrial Revolution with anything here. It could be AI, could be crypto, could be many one of these, I would call it tectonic shift that's coming our way. So I would say even before these shifts were coming, being a generalist is good for a founder, because frankly the interesting things that are coming, we really don't know what they are. So it's important to keep an open mind, and then once you figure out what's interesting, then you kind of become a specialist or an expert.
So good segue into my next question, which is about the pace of innovation. I guess we're living in a time where there's an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, right? And that applies to just about everything, but certainly technology as well. And I feel like every generation feels like they live in the most innovative age. And yet, even in the course of my career, going back following tech since 1997, it does feel like things are just moving more quickly, or either that I'm moving more slowly. I can't tell. But what is the pace of innovation that you're seeing today, Andy, and how does that impact, how you think about your investments and how entrepreneurs should think about their businesses?
Yeah, so Rob, you and I kind of started around the internet time, right? 97 range, mid 90s. We won't go into the exact year. So I think you and I have seen, I forget, 3 or 4 crises already, right? It was the Asian financial crisis, currency crisis. It was the internet bubble, and it was the great financial crisis, which was the Lehman subprime, and then the coronavirus. And apparently there's another one coming. You could call it the tariff, inflation, the globalization, the de-dollarization, lots of this, that. So I feel like every time something happens, it's kind of a hit to our system. And this is really the American trade and order system that we put in the 40s, right after World War II, right? So I was born in Taiwan. We moved to the States when I was 13. So my family have gone through, moved from China to Taiwan, Taiwan to the U.S., and then I went back to China to do business, kind of the full circle. I think what we saw in the last 60 years of the world is a little bit of an anomaly, right? This idea you could just build stuff and ship over it to a neighbor country, sell them at a big profit, and then you could just specialize on what you are good at and just be really good at doing what you do and collaborate with the friendly countries, right? And then that trade alliance worldwide doesn't require a whole lot of security from the local country, right? Because the U.S. is paying for everyone's security worldwide. And that alliance got bigger and bigger. When China joined, it truly was the whole globe. I think that's an anomaly. If you look back into history before World War II, to trade, you got to have a strong navy, right? You got to have lots of guns. You don't need a lot of boots, but you need a lot of guns. You got bigger guns than the local people, right? And before that, it's sort of more of the same. And I think that allows us to build something very unique, right? And the pace of innovation was really fast. But if you take a step back and say, now everybody has to pay, 5-10% of their GDP on security, and once in a while you may get attacked by your neighbor, I think that's going to be more the norm. I'm not sure about the pace of it. Maybe the pace of innovation in defense tech would be really high, right? But the pace of innovation for other things, I think we'll probably have to change, to slow down in different ways, because we can no longer specialize. You got to make your iPhones here, and then you got to make your AI here. So I think it's a new world. I think truly, as we sit here, the world as we know it, the American trade and order is changing. I hope one day you will reflect upon our time here today and say, oh my gosh, that conference I went to in 2025, that was the beginning of a new world. And I'm an optimist. I'll say it will be a different world for sure, and potentially we could make it a better world.
Well, change is hard. So, in software that I follow, companies that create the greatest software in the world and don't appreciate the user experience or change management are doomed. So we're now in a period where there's likely to be some pain associated with this change. So how does that inform, Andy, how you think about it, or how Draper thinks about the way you guys are pivoting to adjust to this new world?
Yeah. So I think I alluded to it. So we're generalists. We look at everything from software to healthcare to AI to crypto. But I see the biggest driver that we're facing today as a society are really the advent of actually 3 things, right? The macro level, the deglobalization, and then to a certain extent, the de-dollarization. And what that translates to VC, two things. It's the advent of AI and crypto, right? The ability of, all of us will be able to work less, and then we'll figure out a way to pay each other through better, more efficient micropayments. What that implies to software is that, and you're already seeing Google, Facebook, and all these big software companies, huge layoffs, right? I still remember just 10 years ago, we were telling all of our kids to get a computer science degree, right? I don't know if anybody's doling out that advice right now. If you do, it's probably some sort of minor or a sort of dual major, right? Because it appears that a lot of AI can just generate code, right? But what AI has yet to figure out is what you mentioned, is kind of figure out the human side. But it will come, right? So the way we look at it is really with a lens of the second, or you call it this third industrial revolution, which is the industrial revolution, really just a productivity improvement. And if you look at AI and crypto, AI by itself will revolutionize the way we work, but without a cheap and efficient real-time payment system, it will take longer. But those two things combined, I think this time the adoption is going to be a lot faster, right? And you'll see that those two things people don't usually talk about together, except some opportunistic people try to pitch you a business plan. You kind of mesh them together. But if you think about it from a high level, at the societal level, those two things are tied, because AI could do work for you, but how do you pay them, right? You definitely don't want to pay them based on a T plus 3. Right? That doesn't make sense, right? It's T plus nanoseconds, as we found out from Robinhood, right? This idea of T plus 3 doesn't settle very well for the Gen Z and the millennial crowd here, right? From my parents' age, they would call in for brokers and place a trade, and I thought, this has got to be the dumbest thing. Why would you do that? I get on the computer. And then, of course, my Gen Z friends, they said, well, why would you even do that? You just do it on your phone, it should be free. And it should settle right away. Why would you wait 3 days? It's your money, right? They don't really care if there's a clearinghouse, there's a custody, there's a transfer agent. Those are all man-made, and they're all going to be gone. And just imagine the kind of jobs they'll create and destroy and transform. Right? It'll be new jobs. And I think that all affects the software industry. It's all going to be new opportunities, right? So I think there's a good reason to be excited about new players coming into the public market. I think there will be many, or the public market themselves company would transform.
A couple questions on timing. So one of the questions I had was on that convergence, and that's, how will Gen AI and blockchain work together as a payment chain for all of these autonomous entities? And it sounds like where market fit was found first is with crypto, if I'm right in that, or at least that's where I see it the most. But I feel like that's the first of many instances where blockchain will be relevant, and that's the right way to think about that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it just turns out crypto came onto the scene as a efficient payment and a store of value in, I forget, 2008 or something. And then since then, we've gone through also 4 or 5 bull markets and crashes, all kinds of exotic ideas and narratives. But it turns out the first proposal of payment and the store of value happened to be the killer app. And I think that it will be, because micropayment specifically, it probably won't be the Bitcoin, the version as we know it, because it's just, no one wants to transact using Bitcoin directly because the cost is too high, and but for many reasons. But you could build payment rails on top. But I think the idea of a micropayment and some sort of an AI agent makes a lot of sense. You ask your AI agent, your AI agent gets to know you a little bit and knows what kind of hotels you like to book, what kind of airline discounts you want, what kind of articles you like to read, and you could pay the journalist directly. The AI agent would just give them a budget and say $30 a month I want to spend on, reading articles. And the agent would figure out a way to negotiate with the author's agent every time. And then your solar panels will be producing electricity that you can sell to your neighbor. And you don't really have to haggle with your neighbor how much electricity to sell and how much. None of this goes back to the grid, right? So there are a lot of applications, and I think it's just it's going to happen in the background. It really is the second or the third industrial revolution, depending on how you count the internet, right? But I really think this is probably bigger than anything we've seen in our lifetime. And for every change, there's a good reason to be fearful, right? It's very common to worry about it. But I think it also represents an opportunity for all of us to look at what's coming ahead.
Speaking of fear, I caught Daniel Cocatello's podcast the other day with Ross Douthat from the New York Times, if anybody caught it. Ross lives in New Haven, by the way, and it was the New York Times podcast, Interesting Times, and he was a former OpenAI guy, and he said he wrote a book, 2027, that's when the machines are going to take over. And that's when humans are done, so we can all prepare for, an eternal vacation. And he's already walking back his timeline a little bit now. He's saying maybe it's 2028. It's modern millenarianism. But how should we think about that? Because all kidding aside, it does appear as if there's going to be a lot of work replacement or displacement by agentic AI.
Great questions. Can I actually do a survey to get you guys engaged? So I'm going to ask you, Matrix or Ready Player One? So raise your hand if Matrix. Right? Roughly half, right? Put your hands in. Right, raise your hands, Ready Player One. Right. Okay, so you get a sense, some of you are maybe too young to have seen The Matrix. Sorry. Okay, so Vicky, my coworker Vicky, and we had our 40th year summit at our firm, and I invited this guy by the name of Bob McGrew to our closed door session with our limited partners to talk specifically about this question. So he was the founding engineer at Palantir, and then he joined OpenAI in 2016. And I was wondering, Bob, why would you join a nonprofit? And little did I know that turned out to be one of the most influential companies in the world. So Bob joked that I asked him this specific question because it's slightly different. So I'll kind of pose my question to him. I was sitting in your chair and I was interviewing Bob. I said, Bob, I was listening to Joe Rogan and Elon Musk. I think your podcast is a little bit more interesting. I was listening to Joe Rogan and Elon Musk. They said there was a 20% chance the bots are going to basically annihilate us. So those two, they don't sugarcoat it, right? So I asked Bob, what do you think? And what Bob said was, well, I created GPT-3. So he joined OpenAI early. He was the chief scientific officer. He said, the first sort of line of programming I put in GPT was, as he was training it, you should think of me as your father. That's a pretty good way to start, right? And I think he, in a way, he was answering my questions to let me know that it's all about sort of the guardrails and how we train the AI. And it is a evolving process. Obviously, if you go talk to ChatGPT now, I haven't tried it. Just try it. Who's your father? And see if Bob McGrew pops up. I bet it doesn't, right? I think it's a continuous process as we develop this. I really call it a tool, right? It's a tool. We'll continue to teach the tool things, right? And I'm an optimist, so I think we develop this tool into something useful as opposed to something that would completely destruct us, right? Just like we mankind created weapons, right? And weapons of mass destruction, right? We're still here. We're still here. Is there a chance somebody's going to nuke us all? Yeah, there's always a chance. But again, I choose to believe that as we evolve, we will co-evolve with the AI and put in the necessary guardrail, right, to really use AI for good. Just like nuclear, we're big investors in nuclear power. Wonderful thing. On the flip side, there's so many nuclear warheads in the world. Not so good things, right? But sometimes technology, you have to take the good and the bad. And it's up to us, everyone in this room, to be a good steward of the technology.
I want to ask about some of the other areas. You mentioned nuclear power. I know you've also done some things in digital health, which are interesting. Both seem like perhaps they are earlier on the disruption curve, perhaps, or so. Maybe touch on those areas or any other areas that you want to touch on that are particularly interesting military related things. I know aerospace, you've done some stuff in there. Like, I know you're a generalist, but what's getting your attention right now?
Oh yeah, so I'll tell you how, so just in terms of being a generalist and really the privilege of being a generalist is that you get to work on things you like. So in this case, in 2010, when our first son was born, I was diagnosed with cancer. So I decided, well, if I'm going to spend all my time working and researching and networking with doctors, I'm going to look at healthcare, even though I'm an engineer. So I looked at all the ways we could use technology to cure healthcare problems. It turns out this was my startling discovery in 2010. I study quantum mechanics as an engineer for my master's. And we could simulate everything. I mean, I could tell you where things are statistically, of course, all these atoms and electrons and holes. And we put all that knowledge to work in these things, right? I'd rather whip out my phone. If your phone breaks, you go to the Apple store, they could pinpoint software, hardware issue, and they can say, all right, this is the issue. There's a component that's broken. I could trace back which factory produced the component, and I could figure out what process went wrong. Right? We could actually go back to each fab. I used to work in the fab, so I know where things messed up. Right? I could go all the way. It's what I call the debugging process is deterministic. If you go to your doctor and you say, hey, doc, something's not working, right? What your doc say? Stress, we'll do more tests, right? Right? And you can't really go back to the manufacturer, your parents, and say, hey, what's wrong with me, right? Can you tell me what's wrong? There was no warranty. The warranty has expired, right?
He wants to move on to or she wants to move on to investment ideas for you. Yeah, exactly. That's what they want.
Exactly. So I was on a mission to make healthcare deterministic, right? And for those of you who study physics or engineering, you'll know that a lot of the physicists eventually become biologists because we got bored of predicting the atoms and the molecules. We got really good at it because we're dealing with small-time systems, right? But when you go to biology, look at the human body. I mean, that is a very complicated system. It's a lot more difficult to predict, right? So I got really interested in taking some of the simulation technologies we have that we discover in physics, which then we apply to electronics and semiconductors and iPhones, right? The simulations. These are all, difficult simulation problems, but you apply that to biology. So the last 10 years, we really saw the advent of, now it sounds very fancy, or they call AI-based discovery. We were just trying to simulate these molecules, right? And that's the other thing, sort of the beauty of being a generalist. When we started solving difficult problems, we just thought we were doing the obvious things. Of course, electronics industry, you have Cadence, Synopsys, all these companies, billion-dollar companies selling to Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, designing chips. Why don't they also sell to, Johnson Johnson, Eli Lilly, and, Merck, right? Why don't they do that? And in the meantime, these poor biologists were, they're in the dark room, petri dish and test tubes. Why not just do it all on the computer and call it a day? Obviously, it's not as easy as I had imagined, but I'm an optimist. I always like to imagine the world where biologists could just, sit at home watching Netflix and just click go and simulate everything, come back and tell, here's a drug you could take. So we're still working on that, but I think we're getting closer. 10 years in, we could at least narrow down targets. You still need test tubes and petri dishes, and also as an animal welfare, rights advocate, I hope to get rid of animal testing because I think a lot of that is just unnecessary. And if you talk to, one side of the political spectrum, we believe it's unnecessary, it's cruel, it's inhumane. The other side of the political spectrum, it's just wasteful, it's red tape, takes time. Cancer patients like myself, I don't want to wait. Just run the drug through a computer. If it works, I'll take my chances, right? So it's a patient rights, and it's also expensive. So I think there's a lot of good in they now call it AI-based drug discovery. I still think it's just simulating drugs using quantum physics, and I think it will come. It's really that's an example of using AI for good, right? One of these days, all of us could go to the Apple store and say, "Hey, I don't feel good," and then they'll say, "Let's run a simulation. All right, take this, or here's a shot, and go home and go back on your vacation." Right? I think you'll get there. I think you'll get there. I think the other thing you said is defense and aerospace. So again, I find it interesting as a generalist. This is 19 or something, or 18, I forget. One of my coworkers, Matt Harris, also is from this area. He worked out of our Texas office. So he brought us all these interesting deep tech investments, hypersonic super engines and 3D printed rocket fuels, space station companies. Oh, it's really interesting because that industry, if you look at it as a whole, have really not benefited or been disrupted by the what we call the startup tech founders, right? They're kind of in the cost plus mindset. Go to the government and say, hey, this is how much. I mean, whoever came up with that idea of cost plus, I mean, it's both genius and idiotic, right? I just don't know how we were able to pass that business model through our economy, the government, but it is what it is. So now it's changing, right? So it turns out that whole industry, so we started investing in that industry thinking it was deep tech, but now it's being branded as dual use. So I also love it because I just find that we just do the work until the really good marketing people from the VC industry give it a name. Whether it's AI drug discovery companies or fintech companies or dual use, it's essentially just using sort of applying a little bit of common sense and technology and apply to industries that is ripe for disruption. So it turns out defense or aerospace, it was ripe for disruption. 3D printed, 3D printing technology has always been around for a long time. Now we're applying to the defense tech industry. It turns out these 3D printed rocket propellants are really handy because the supply chain, these javelins and Stinger missiles used to take a couple years to produce. And like I said, the world and the geopolitics took a vacation last 40 years. So you really didn't need to have a good supply chain, right? But unfortunately, it looks like they may need to function more like an Apple, right? The customers can't really wait. The Ukraine theater apparently used up all of our supplies, and then now you have a couple wars in the world going on, and there will be more. So a 2-year cycle time manufacturing process for a mission critical application doesn't bode well. right? So turns out 3D printed technology is really good for defense industry. They could produce, on the spot, real time, on demand, just in time. A lot of concept just came from IT. And we just thought that was an interesting thing to invest in to modernize the defense and aerospace industry. But it turns out, unfortunately, the application is, just more hot war going on in the world. So, so it's happening as we speak.
That's great. I wanted to pivot in the time that we have remaining to talk a little bit about the VC, the business of VC and VC business, and I'm sure there's some people in this room who have ideas and are here for that reason. So, Andy, how have the needs of startups changed in the years that you've been doing this? How has that evolved?
I think two things happened. The pace of innovation and the velocity of ideas and the capital efficiency of startup formation have drastically changed in the last 20 years. I still remember the days when I talked to the really old guys. They would tell me, when we first started, and this is a gentleman who literally had a business plan, a book, and I saw it as Apple computers. I was like, man, is this for real? Like, Steve Jobs actually wrote a business plan. So from that era, so he was telling me, back in the days, we didn't really have deal flow. We just drove down the street, and there was no Sand Hill Road, of course, because there were just apple orchards, right, or cherry, and just knock on doors and see, hey, what are you working on, right? Not even looking up the phone book. It was like, what are you working on, right? So when I started 20 years ago, we at least have other investors we kind of put our heads together and what have you seen, right? Or we might go to a local university and say, Professor so-and-so, are you working on this? Have you thought about, spinning this off? And that was actually a pretty easy task. I started my career investing in optical components. And I could deterministically figure out where the next startup is going to come out in the optical component space, because I just go look at the papers who have published the most interesting papers and where it's either IBM Watson, AT&T Bell Labs, or one of the top universities. But these days, the opportunity is that the idea could come from anywhere in the world, right? And this is what I call the intelligence and talent is everywhere. And in fact, I would argue it's uniformly distributed in the world, right? Smart people, but opportunities are not. What that means is that the next most interesting idea of startup could come from anywhere, right? So that's one thing that has happened since when I first started 20 years ago. The second thing that happened was, believe it or not, if you had an intranet idea 10, 15 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, first thing you got to do is you got to go out and raise $5 to $10 million. Why? You got to build your own servers. There's no AWS, right? And there were no accelerators who would give you money to start trying your ideas. So I think because of that, the startup formation process has become so much faster, right? But just like I tell my kids, I said, you look at what I have done, you said you may be very impressed, but you guys are more impressive. The results just won't be as impressive because the competition is a lot higher, right? So it's double-edged sword. My kids are much smarter. They have a lot more information. They are doing the things that I could not imagine I would do at their age. But the problem is, the situation is, there are so many other kids who are like them, right? And it really makes, you have to rethink what is success.
I don't know how many people here use Slack or know Slack, but I think of it as an example sometimes because when Stuart Butterfield started that company, he started as a gaming company, as you well know. But then somewhere along the way, that didn't work. And he pivoted. And he pivoted to something that was incredibly successful. So I guess my question is, when you're looking at both business plans and entrepreneurs, how important or how do you sort of rank order that need to adapt as the pace of innovation causes things to change?
Yeah, so that's a good example, and I'll share a similar example. There's a guy by the name of Justin Kahn. So we invest in Justin. I wonder, I forget which Ivy he came out of. It might have been from New Haven here, but that's besides the point. Interesting guy, and his thesis was, I'm just going to videotape. It was videotape myself. Right? There's no iPhone. It was videotape myself and just broadcast. Right? I gotta imagine, out of this room, everybody would say, "Well, that's got to be the dumbest idea ever." Why would you even do that, right? It turns out, it's called Justin TV, right? Justin TV. Get it? Justin TV. Very, very, very classic founder, a little quirky. Well, it turns out he was a good founder. We invested, and then he kept pivoting. And you know what it turned into? It turned into equally dumb idea. It's a website where people watch other people play games. I was like, why would you want to do that? Watching this guy is boring enough. Watching these other guys playing games. Well, it turns out I've learned as a good investor, I stopped using myself as a judge. Because I'm already the worst consumer. I turned down the first phone that wanted to, integrate. We used to, by the way, Rob and I used to carry a phone and a digital camera, separate devices. Yeah. Right. There's no reason to commingle the two. Right. So I turned that deal down as well. But so Justin TV turned into Twitch. Apparently, young boys especially like doing that. Yeah. Right. So who would have thought? So the conclusion there was, don't judge just the idea, right? Oftentimes, it's not your itinerary that matters. It's really the captain of the ship, right? The itinerary could change, right? In fact, I argue it's easier to change the itinerary and not just harder to change the captain. At Draper, we said founders leave, the companies die. So it's impossible to change the captain. Can you imagine? You're in the middle of the ocean. How the heck do you change the captain? You bring another ship. It doesn't quite work, right? So I think the founder is a lot more important than the idea. And being an early stage investor, the first thing I tell our founders is that, okay, now we invested in you. I want to make sure you know that if you have to pivot, it is okay. It is okay. I don't want them to feel beholden to the idea because, early stage seed round, what do you know, right? In fact, if you don't make adjustments, I will wonder what's wrong with you. Right? But I ask of only one thing. It's a rule of three. Rule of three. Before you start a company, think hard 3 times. Before you change or quit, think hard 3 times before you pivot.
I just have a couple more questions, and then I wanted to make sure we left time to open it up to the room for questions for Andy. By the time a company gets to me, there's some pretty well-defined ways to measure success, key performance indicators, metrics. What's the right way for a company that's early stage that you're looking at to think about how they should be measuring success?
Yeah, I think that I often think about startup milestones as almost building a credit history with the credit bureau, right? It's setting your own milestones and making sure you achieve them over time and build your personal credibility. So I also often think about startup milestones as every 18 months. You should have tangible milestones because that's how we kind of budget the fundraising, 18 months, right? What you could do and make sure you hit them, right? And then kind of beat the expectation. It's not about, it almost sounds bad, you're managing your earnings from a public sense, but it's about building your credibility it'll be equivalent to saying, in theory, you should always pay your bills on time, right? No one's going to accuse you, you must manage your bill payment. I do manage it because I want to make sure I pay them on time, right? And that's not a bad thing. So with startup companies, that is also the case. You want to have certain milestones, and these are tangible milestones you could hit, right? And then sometimes you might have stretch goals, right? And those tend to be more financial. But the operating milestones, including financials, you should hit. Make sure you hit them.
You mentioned that, I'll paraphrase something, like talent's evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And really, one of the things that excites me, why I was happy Claudia invited me to join today, is just because it felt like there's a tremendous amount of talent in the New Haven area, thanks to Yale and other institutions, but that the opportunity wasn't always here.
The embarrassment of riches here in terms of talent.
I mean, it's here, right? And so, can a startup do it here? Can they do it in another place that's like this place? And I think, during COVID, I think there was a period of optimism and hope that, the distributed workforce could open up, Is that still real? Is that still an opportunity? Can a startup be anywhere? Can the talent be everywhere? Or do they have to be in one room? And does that room have to be in, Cambridge or in Silicon Valley?
So I think it's the answer is yes, but I think it's really a game of chance. And it's a game of critical mass, right? And it's not a critical mass of talent. It's a critical mass of open-mindedness. Where can you find a place where you could find people of all walks of life be open-minded to startups and startup mindset, right? And it ranges from lawyers, accountants, to employees, to your landlord. And then lastly, I want to tell you something interesting, to the mother-in-law. Okay, this is very important, so you want to listen well. So I moved to China in 2006, never worked there before. Tim Draper and I launched the China Fund. And then we said, how can we feel it. All the Chinese entrepreneurs are going back, American Chinese entrepreneurs going back. This is going to be the next Silicon Valley. We felt it, right? It's coming. It turns out it was true, right? 20 years later, that thesis was correct. But we went through a phase of non-believers, right? And I'll just use one single example. We're trying to, initially, the startup ecosystem didn't work in China. Not because of lack of venture capital. There were plenty of people who want to make money, right? Not because there's a lack of talent. There were plenty of Chinese-American engineers capable working at Cisco, Intel, ready to go back and just start from scratch, dominate the Chinese market. You know what the problems were? It was actually the mother-in-laws, right? To recruit a young engineer to your company, the young engineer has to go back and check with the wife. And if you check with the wife is going to check with the mom. The mom is going to say, where do you work? And you have two offers. IBM versus Startup XYZ funded by Andy Tang. Completely no street cred. Who is this? For all the mother-in-law knows, this is a fly-by-night operation, right? Doesn't even have a work permit in Shanghai. So first couple of years, just had trouble recruiting, right? It doesn't matter. You have good founders. You can't find engineers. But guess what? A few years in, once you have a few IPOs, the mother-in-law is like, this seems legit, right? And then when I left in 2010, the mother-in-law was so sophisticated. She's like, oh, you've got 100,000 shares of stock options, right? What's the fully diluted shares and what percentage do you own, right? She's not thinking about shares and dollar count. You try to game that? No, she wants to know what percentage engineer you own. So I think if you could get to that level of understanding of startup in a certain region, then it's good, right? Silicon Valley, we should joke, there was a carpet store in downtown Palo Alto. You probably know who I'm talking about. He sold some carpets to the PayPal founders, and he said, hey, I can sell you something else. You want to use my space upstairs? Sold you some space for options, right? And that turns out to be how Plug and Play got started. They got some options for free rent. They sold carpet and space, got options, right? So what I'm getting at is if you have a region with that kind of open-mindedness, everybody from landlord to mother-in-laws to lawyers and accountants, right? Then that's a region you're probably going to find a lot of new entrepreneurs coming in, and then they'll cause what Tony Hsieh used to call, the founder of Zappos, that collision, right? That collision of ideas of people, and then you'll find some really interesting things happening.
It's great. Obviously, we've got an amazing resource here in Andy, so I wanted to see if there's any questions from the audience. Yeah, should I? Great, thanks.
Thank you. Andy, great insight. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your insights about AI and crypto, and I particularly agree with your optimism about AI in our future. As a neuroscientist and an entrepreneur, my question is about brain-computer interfaces, and we haven't talked about it in this specific keynote speech, but the question I want to set with the premise, which is smartphones made internet widely accessible. I think that's the big idea being scaled at the best. And at that level, where do you see AI, how it's going to be scaled? And do you see BCIs as a good way to scale it into wide population through consumer electronics?
Yeah, it's inevitable. It's coming. It's coming. In fact, I'll even tie that to healthcare. As I was thinking about how could I don't necessarily want to live forever. I want to live long enough so my kids could see me, could grow up, right? So the idea is that, so you come to a realization it's about preserving this versus preserving that. This is a lot more complicated to keep running, right? If I could somehow just upload this part, and it's becoming more possible. I actually use a tool called DadBot, maybe 10 years ago. Unfortunately, DadBot, I outlived DadBot. That company went under, right? So I think it's coming. It's to me, it's not a question. It's going to come, right? And I don't want to opine on whether it's good or bad for humanity, but I think it's very natural. You don't really need the body parts to operate. In fact, military is already trying this decades ago. Instead of a fighter jet pilot pushing a button, why not just go from here? Gamers try to do it. The technology is available. I think it'll be refined. And I think it's going to tie with AI. It's going to tie with the preservation of consciousness. It's all coming all at once. For good. I'm an optimist, so I think it's for good.
Thank you again so much for all your great insights. So with so much changing and so fast and so much coming at you, what is it that is that magic secret sauce of elements that make a startup exciting to you and a good investment?
It's you, right? It's really coming from the founder, right? We are really, again, not to nerd out in physics, my job is to preserve the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. As I observe the event, I don't want to sort of put an influence on that event. I want to see what's going on with the founder, right? I mean, everything I'm telling you here, I didn't come up with it. It's by talking with people like you, and I get a sense of the market, what people are feeling. This is crowdsourced. None of this is original and patentable and copyrighted. It's all from you. So I'm trying to figure out what makes you guys excited, right? And then I'll say, all right, one of you seems more excited than others, and I want to be part of the journey. And that is really what's happening here. Is that helpful?
Very.
Yeah.
So, Andy, my question as a follow-up on that is, over your career, the evolution of the partnership between the early stage and the startup. So once you've selected to make your investment, has the expectation of the partnership between the two entities changed? Do you see?
It always changes, and the challenge is oftentimes people worry about, oh, we got your money. I want to play safe. This is like a basketball game. You have a lead, and then you play safe. how many times have you seen people squander a lead and lose a game? So we always tell people, again, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Once our money is in, don't let us affect your gig, right? Keep at it because we invest in you for that reason. It's risky, yes, we understand, but it's even riskier if you play safe. I think there was a question in the back.
We got one over here too.
Okay.
If we could go, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much. I really appreciated you speaking about competition and how fierce that is. Could you provide some words of wisdom about how to think about it in terms of, how to think about competition? For example, like, how much do you focus on it when you're really, trying to go through and operationalize your own idea? And how do you measure success? Because part of being an entrepreneur is, it's about mindset. And how do you keep that mindset when there's so many others that may have a similar idea and you're trying to kind of maybe go first to market, or there's already someone who's maybe a year or so ahead of you?
Okay, so measure successful entrepreneur is a golf game. Measuring success for a venture capitalist is a track and field. So for you could set up, hey, I want to dominate or bring computer interface, right? I want to be the best, right? That's your goal, right? That's a golf game because you set it up and you got to beat that. For me, I have a responsibility to my investors. They will compare me with all the other 100-meter sprinters in the world and say, are you faster or are you slower? It's as simple as that. So my job is to sort of make that translation by finding the best golf players I think is going to aim for the sky and stratosphere, and then translate that into the world's best performing athletes on the track and field. So for my measurement, they're absolute, right? 100 meters, what is that? 9 point whatever seconds. If I'm slower than that, I failed, right? So I want to be below that. But for you, the sky is the limit. For entrepreneurs, you can set whatever, and then we will just evaluate whether that's a fit for us.